I didn't say a word when they slapped that eviction notice in front of me. I just slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table and watched 35 McMansions turn into instant lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could snatch my grandfather's farm while I was deployed in Afghanistan. These pompous bureaucrats built their perfect suburban paradise on stolen land, complete with tennis outfit-clad Karen patrols cruising around in golf carts. What they didn't know? I'm an Army Corps engineer. That little earth dam on my property had been waiting 45 years for someone foolish enough to build downstream. Their audacity was impressive, until the spillway gates opened and their luxury development got its first taste of natural flooding. And oh, it was going to be glorious. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most satisfying HOA takedown involving federal water law and gravity. Let me introduce myself, Jake Morrison. That's me, 34 years old, Army Corps of Engineers, and the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land just outside Austin. My grandfather, everyone called him Pops, bought this land back in 1955, when Austin was still a sleepy college town and barbecue joints outnumbered tech companies by 1,000 to 1. Pops believed in taking care of the land and the people on it. In 1978, he built a small earth dam on our property. Nothing fancy, just solid engineering designed to collect rainwater for the cattle and help downstream neighbors during dry spells. The Army Corps even lent a hand with the design. Pops always said that someday the back 40 acres would be something special. For now, it was just beautiful rolling hills where we ran cattle and I learned to hunt.
Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan, specializing in water management and infrastructure. Turns out, building wells and controlling water flow in a war zone teaches you just how precious clean water is, and how quickly people will fight over it. While I was on my second deployment, Pops passed away. The property went into a trust managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed sister Sarah, who lives in California and knows about as much about Texas land law as I know about surfing. She hired a local property management company, Lone Star Land Services, to handle taxes and upkeep. The taxes got paid automatically. But here's the problem. Sarah never actually looked at the tax assessment. Big mistake. Enter our villain, Margaret Maggie Thornwell, 52 years old, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and the kind of woman who drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis outfits like business suits. Maggie has that special brand of passive-aggressive sweetness Southern women perfect around age 45. You know, the kind where they smile while stabbing you in the back and somehow make it sound like they're doing you a favor. Maggie's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, which honestly tells you all you need to know about how she gets things done. Maggie had a reputation for neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is just a fancy way of saying she forces out anyone who doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. The scent of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the cloud of cigarette smoke and entitlement that seemed to follow her everywhere. I came home from deployment in August 2023, finally ready to spend some real time on Pops's land. I drove down that familiar gravel road, past the old oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid, expecting the same rolling pastures and my little earth dam sparkling in the Texas sun.
Instead, I found construction crews, concrete trucks, and survey stakes scattered across my back 40 like some kind of suburban invasion. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different this time, angrier. I could taste the dust and my own rising fury as I marched up to the foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, without a shred of apology. "We got permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez showed up and, clearly uncomfortable, explained that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas.
Basically, if land sits unused for a certain period and someone can prove they've been improving it, they can sometimes claim ownership. It's an old law meant to stop land from just sitting empty, but developers and HOAs love using it to expand their little empires. Then Maggie appeared, rolling up in her golf cart like a suburban warlord. Her voice had that syrupy sweetness that made me want to check my wallet. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." But here's what really made my blood boil. Her construction crews had diverted the small creek that fed Pop's Dam. The water level was dropping day by day, along with 45 years of careful water management that had helped our neighbors survive droughts, floods, and everything in between. As I watched the water fall, Maggie's parting shot echoed in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I knew this wasn't just about land. This was war.
I hired the first attorney I could find. Big mistake. This guy quoted me $85,000 just to challenge a zoning change. Turns out, while I was serving my country, Maggie's husband, Rick, had pushed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's land went from agricultural pre-validation to residential development faster than you could say conflict of interest. Here's where my Army Corps training kicked in. While that overpriced lawyer shuffled papers and racked up hours, I was digging through county records like I was hunting for IEDs. And, just like in Afghanistan, the devil was in the details. I found Pop's original 1978 dam construction permits, and they were perfect. Pops hadn't built that dam alone. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction. And that, my friends, is your first nugget of knowledge. Any dam built with federal guidance automatically falls under federal jurisdiction, something local HOAs can't override, period. A metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I realized what I'd uncovered. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a federal case. And it gets better. While photocopying permits at the courthouse, I stumbled across a 1923 water rights deed buried in the old records. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single McMansion sitting on my land. They weren't just trying to steal my property, they were trying to steal my water. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy playing the victim. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the supposedly dangerous dam, complete with a local news crew she'd obviously tipped off. I watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, talking about children's safety and neighborhood security.
"We're just concerned about our children's safety," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news, they love a dramatic story, but they don't always bother to check the facts. If they had, they would have seen that my dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't done. She posted on the Nextdoor app, the digital playground where HOA presidents flex their petty authority. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. In a community that small, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung heavy in the August air as I stood on my front porch each evening, watching their construction crews work double shifts. They were racing to finish those houses before I could get any kind of legal injunction. Every night, I counted new foundation pours. Every night, the water level in Pop's Dam dropped another inch. That's when I called my old Army buddy, Tony Riggs, who now works for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught me more about environmental law than 3 hours with that expensive attorney. "Jake," Tony said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation." He didn't even need to finish the sentence about my dam having federal jurisdiction. I already knew. I started documenting everything. Trail cameras along the property perimeter, time-stamped photos of every water diversion, flow measurements at 3 points along the creek. My sister Sarah called from California, begging me to take the money and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the crunch of gravel under construction boots that had no business on my land. It was about the sound of Maggie's heels clicking across courthouse marble during zoning hearings that should never have happened. It was about the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during late-night research sessions that revealed just how deep the corruption ran. Most of all, it was about that dam. Pops built it to help the community during dry spells. For 45 years, it had been a source of life for our neighbors downstream. And now, Maggie's crew was turning it into a decorative pond for McMansions. Here's the thing about water rights in Texas. They're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and a hell of a lot harder to steal. But you have to know how to fight for them. As I stood there, watching another concrete truck rumble past my kitchen window, I realized something important. This wasn't going to be a battle fought in a courtroom with expensive lawyers and thick legal briefs. This was going to be a fight of engineering, strategy, and patience. Maggie decided to turn up the heat. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts who parked at my property entrance like a suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, jotted down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about anything they deemed suspicious. The harassment campaign was textbook intimidation. Complaints about loud music when I played my radio while working the farm. Citations for unsightly structures. My perfectly functional farmhouse, standing since 1962. Alleged environmental hazards. Reports about my septic system, which had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. But the real kick in the teeth came when Rick used his city council position to order a wellness check on me through Veteran Services. Suddenly, I was labeled a troubled veteran, supposedly struggling with readjustment issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic, but thorough, checking boxes on her clipboard while Maggie watched from her golf cart like a drill sergeant overseeing a military inspection. Then, the coordinated bureaucratic assault began. On the same day, the building inspector, fire marshal, health department, and animal control all showed up, like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found minor violations requiring costly fixes. The building inspector, a drinking buddy of Rick's, declared my front porch needed $8,000 in foundation work. I recognized the tactic immediately. It's the same pressure game used in war zones. Overwhelm your opponent with bureaucracy until they buckle. But two can play that game. While they tried drowning me in paperwork, I made some phone calls of my own. Tony Riggs at the EPA lit up when I told Maggie's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Any development that diverts a natural waterway requires federal environmental clearance even on private property. And the fines? They start at $50,000 per day. Every morning, the smell of fresh concrete curing in the summer heat reminded me how little time I had. But my research was paying off in ways Maggie never expected. I discovered their entire development was built in what the Army Corps classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies initially refused coverage until the HOA provided a flood mitigation plan. Their solution? Permanently divert Willow Creek away from the new homes and let it flood my property instead. Here's your second nugget of knowledge. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When developers lie about flood risks to get coverage, that's federal mail fraud. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Maggie's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a $2.3 million EPA fine for the exact same creek diversion scheme. She left town just ahead of the federal prosecutors and set up shop here in Austin, hunting for new victims. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy spreading rumors about my mental health and supposed violent tendencies. She hired a private investigator to dig into my military service and even organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public nuisance. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." While Maggie was busy playing the victim, I was building alliances. I connected with other HOA victims through online forums and discovered a pattern. Over the past 3 years, Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties using these same tactics every time: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Rick's construction company. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whose family garden had withered since the creek diversion. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned out of existence by Rick Thornwell 2 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic land grab that had been going on for years. The vibration of heavy machinery through my farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Every morning, concrete trucks rumbled past my kitchen window. Every evening, I documented the water theft slowly killing Pop's Dam. I also prepared. I installed water flow meters at the dam outlet and creek diversion points. I calculated the exact volume of water being stolen, 1,200 gallons per day, worth $47,000 annually in agricultural water rights. The gritty texture of sand between my fingers as I tested creek bed sediment told the story better than any lawyer ever could. This wasn't just theft, it was environmental destruction on a massive scale. Then came the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Maggie's quote in the paper made her strategy crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. But as I stood at my bedroom window that night, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, I realized something important. Those weren't just rain clouds, they were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear. Rick fast-tracked the eminent domain hearing. Suddenly, the HOA was offering me $180,000 for a property assessed at $890,000. The message was blunt: take the lowball offer or lose everything. The local newspaper ran a hit piece portraying me as a domestic terrorist. The headline screamed, "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress," complete with a photo making my farmhouse look like a crack den and me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. But Maggie's masterstroke was the photo op. She staged it perfectly. 20 concerned mothers holding children near my property line. A professional photographer capturing worried faces while my farmhouse loomed menacingly in the background. The Facebook post went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told the Channel 7 news crew. "Not whatever issues he brought back from war." You know what? She was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. The ability to recognize when someone is trying to steamroll you with propaganda, and the engineering skills to fight back. Then Tony Riggs called with information that changed everything. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into Willow Creek diversions based on my initial complaint. But here's the kicker. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston had faced a $2.3 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals, even when they move to new jurisdictions. While Maggie played the victim on social media, I discovered that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values, and the banks had required guaranteed water access to approve the financing. If those water rights reverted back to me, their rightful owner, the entire development would collapse financially. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my water to make their land valuable, and now their own greed was about to drown them. Maggie's panic was starting to show. She offered me $400,000 cash, no questions asked, with a 48-hour deadline. I refused. Then she flew to California to try her tricks on my sister, Sarah, spinning some sob story about her troubled veteran brother. That backfired spectacularly. Maggie might not know Texas land law, but she knows her brother. She called me laughing. "Jake, some crazy woman in tennis clothes just offered to help you." I told her if Maggie contacted our family again, I'd call the FBI. While Maggie was busy making enemies, I was busy building allies. I partnered with environmental lawyer Amanda Cross, a specialist in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition with downstream farmers affected by the creek diversion. Miguel Santos brought historical documentation proving his family had farmed with creek water since 1887. Mrs. Chen provided photographs of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, once fed by the same creek that now watered Maggie's decorative water features. The local Audubon Society was especially interested. They discovered the creek diversion had destroyed critical nesting habitats for several protected bird species. Turns out, killing protected wildlife while committing water theft gets federal attention fast. During my nighttime reconnaissance, old Army habits die hard, I discovered something beautiful. Pop's Dam wasn't just a simple earthwork structure. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water flowing through those underground channels during my midnight tests told me everything I needed to know. The mechanism was still fully functional, designed for exactly this situation, controlled flooding to restore natural water flow. I calculated the water volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original path, 2.8 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.1 million gallons thanks to recent rainfall. The math was perfect, but timing had to be precise. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the new home foundations relative to the original creek bed. 5 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the beautiful part. The construction crews had installed decorative creek beds using concrete and stones. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed to handle actual water flow. Meanwhile, my spillway system had been engineered by the Army Corps specifically for flood management. Then Maggie made her biggest mistake. Her crew started installing permanent concrete barriers to completely block the original creek bed. This would render my spillway useless and permanently destroy the downstream ecosystem. But it also gave me the perfect justification for what I was about to do. The Weather Service predicted heavy September rains, perfect seasonal cover for emergency dam maintenance. As I stood at the spillway controls at sunset, reading Pop's journal entry about helping neighbors during droughts, the decision crystallized. It was time to open the gates. And then, while digging through dusty courthouse records for the 3rd time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments, I found it. The original agricultural flood management covenant from Pop's dam construction. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding, it was a legal obligation, one that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. But Amanda Cross's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications were full of outright lies. They had claimed no seasonal flooding risk and permanent creek diversion approved by all agencies to secure $47 million in coverage. Here's your third nugget of knowledge. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. Lying to insurance companies about environmental risks? That's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the scheme unraveled. Rick Thornmill's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development, it was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land funneled money directly into his pocket. And the kicker? He never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his project. Tony Riggs shared EPA findings that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had killed the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the fish kill, but somehow the report got lost in Rick's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water, they were destroying an entire ecosystem. The real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured by fraudulent environmental assessments claiming the creek diversion was temporary.
Banks were told the water would be returned to its natural flow once construction was complete. If those water rights reverted to me, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $12 million in construction loans. That's when I found Pop's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. His 1980 entry broke my heart. Open spillway today. Help the Santos farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam had never been about profit. It was about community service, helping downstream neighbors survive droughts, managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, I realized what Maggie had really stolen. It wasn't just land or water. It was 45 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had built, one neighbor at a time. My engineering analysis confirmed what I'd suspected. Maggie's creek diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard. During heavy rains, the redirected water would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had provided natural flood control for the entire watershed, and my spillway system was the only way to safely manage seasonal flooding. The timeline pressure was crushing. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural flooding would happen anyway, potentially causing real property damage. But if I acted now, I could control the timing and intensity. A controlled spillway release would restore natural flood patterns without endangering anyone, while proving that the HOA development had violated federal environmental law. Standing at those spillway controls at sunset, holding Pop's journal in my hands, moral clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about restoring the natural balance that had supported this community for generations.
Maggie had systematically torn the local farming world apart. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chen watched her ancestral garden wither without creek water. 3 other families were forced to sell their generational land to Rick's ruthless eminent domain schemes. But the timing couldn't have been better. Federal environmental investigators were scheduled to arrive next month. If I could prove the natural flooding patterns before they showed up, it would expose the HOA development for violating multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid and metal controls filled the air as I stood at the dam. This equipment was built to endure. Pops had designed it for moments like this, when someone would need the courage to stand up for the creek and the people who depended on it. As storm clouds rolled in on the horizon, the decision became clear. It was time to honor Pop's legacy. Time to open the gates. But you don't just open a dam on impulse. This wasn't revenge. This was a calculated operation with legal protection, environmental justification, and full community backing. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum exposure the moment the spillway opened. Tony Riggs worked behind the scenes, making sure EPA investigators would witness what he called our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, supplying historical proof of seasonal flood patterns that showed the creek diversion was strangling generational farms. Mrs. Chen offered her property as our staging area, adding the unquestionable credibility of the community's most respected resident. Amanda's legal approach was genius. She filed an emergency motion for agricultural water rights restoration, arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain natural seasonal flooding. We weren't breaking the law, we were obeying it.
Here's a crucial truth. Agricultural water rights often outrank residential development rights, especially when there's historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having bulletproof paperwork that predates any modern development. My technical preparation followed pure Army Corps engineering protocol. I created a precise spillway operation plan. Controlled release at 6 a.m., gradual increase over 4 hours, peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was calculated to show natural flood behavior without causing structural damage, except to Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety came first. I posted warning signs a full 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't reckless destruction. It was a controlled demonstration of how the creek was always meant to flow. Amanda alerted environmental reporters from the Austin American-Statesman and local news stations. Miguel organized community members to witness the agricultural water restoration firsthand. The strategy was simple. Control the story before Maggie could twist it into dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network felt straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Chen tracked HOA activity through her underground web of neighborhood gossip. Never underestimate elderly women with sharp airs and endless patience. The local diner waitress, who just happened to be Miguel's cousin, kept tabs on closed-door city council meetings. And one of my Army buddies at Fort Hood provided surveillance drone footage for legal documentation. While I rebuilt the spillway controls with updated hydraulic systems, Amanda launched a parallel assault, waging financial warfare that would soon start collapsing Maggie's entire operation. Amanda went to work like a general coordinating a multi-front campaign. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraudulent applications, had banking regulators review construction loan documents, and prepared whistleblower complaints exposing Rick's blatant conflicts of interest.
The beauty was in the timing. The Weather Service confirmed heavy rains arriving in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled the federal environmental inspection for that same week. Miguel arranged for the agricultural extension agent to document downstream benefits. A perfect storm of natural weather, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. I knew Maggie's psychology. She always escalated when pressured. So I prepared for her predictable responses. An emergency HOA meeting, a media smear campaign, maybe even a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses for every expected attack. Evidence preservation was critical. I compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the creek diversion, recorded video testimony from affected farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing the original creek bed and seasonal flood patterns. Amanda secured everything in federal court filings for maximum legal protection. Safety was paramount. I coordinated with the volunteer fire department, communicated directly with downstream residents, and posted detailed notices in both English and Spanish. I even created an evacuation plan we wouldn't need just to show responsible management. Amanda handled the economic warfare. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General with evidence of insurance fraud, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a systematic pattern of racketeering. Here's another nugget of knowledge. Coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlements faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate at once, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air as I serviced every piece of equipment and tested the spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built this system to last. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Maggie would try everything to stop me. Amanda filed protective court orders to prevent interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radios.
Standing at the controls for the final equipment check, watching storm clouds build on the horizon, everything felt aligned. Heavy rains were expected in 48 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 36. Maggie was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 24. Probably planning another attack on my character. The timing was perfect. Dawn would bring justice, and 45 years of stolen water back to where it belonged. Maggie's desperation reached a new level when she hired private security to patrol my property. These weren't ordinary rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were tactical Geel wannabes who thought an HOA dispute was a combat zone. My trail cameras caught them red-handed trying to sabotage the spillway at 2 a.m. One genius was filmed attempting to jam concrete into the hydraulic lines, while his buddy served as lookout. Tony Riggs had tipped off the sheriff's department, and Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed he was protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual. But it's hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quick-set concrete at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Maggie's media blitz went full meltdown. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show in her Sunday best, using that trembling victim voice politicians perfect. "Veterans need mental health support, not weapons," she told the host, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening to wash away children's homes." Rick provided expert testimony as a city engineer, warning of catastrophic dam failure risks, conveniently forgetting that my dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. But while Maggie was busy playing the helpless victim on live TV, my old surveillance training was doing exactly what it was meant to do. I recorded every sabotage attempt, every illegal trespass, and every shady move. All of it would later point straight to criminal conspiracy. Tony brought even darker news. Federal investigators had been secretly tapping Rick's office phone as part of a long-running corruption investigation. These people were far more desperate than I'd first believed. Then came the legal ambush.
Rick rushed through an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m. the next morning, clearly trying to catch us off guard. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golf buddy and proud recipient of $15,000 in campaign donations from Rick's construction company, agreed to hear the so-called public safety motion. Amanda uncovered the dirty connection and immediately filed to have Walsh removed from the case. But we already knew how this would play out. If they couldn't stop the spillway legally, they'd use a crooked judge to do it. At the same time, Maggie gathered a neighborhood safety patrol to surround my land. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and posters reading "Protect Our Kids," planning to live stream the spillway opening and label it environmental terrorism. The picture she painted was perfect for her story. Sweet suburban families versus one dangerous veteran with a dam. But Miguel Santos wasn't sitting still either. He brought 30 farmers and their families to stand with us, calling it what it really was: agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chan organized a counter-protest, displaying old photos that showed the creek flowing in its natural path. Even Amanda arranged for representatives from the Audubon Society and the Sierra Club to attend. Two powerful stories were about to clash head-on: families versus veteran, or community protecting its water rights. Then things took a darker turn. Security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, creating a deadly blockage meant to cause real flooding if I opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was attempted murder dressed up as vandalism.
I worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, breaking apart the sabotage and carefully documenting every piece of concrete as evidence. Exhaustion coated my tongue with a metallic taste, but anger kept me standing. I couldn't believe how far they were willing to go. Rick used his emergency powers as a city council member to declare my land an imminent public hazard, ordering the fire department to secure the dam. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the last honest men in town, pulled me aside and spoke quietly. "Jake, this is political. You've got maybe 6 hours before they force my hand. Make it count." Then came the breakthrough. Amanda's fraud reports finally triggered a state investigation. The Texas Insurance Commission froze every HOA development insurance policy. Without valid coverage, construction had to stop immediately. For the first time, the pressure hit where it truly hurt: Maggie and Rick's wallets. Tony followed up with more news. The EPA inspection was moved up by 24 hours due to credible sabotage concerns. Federal agents were now on the way, arriving at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their inspection, it would become official proof of proper water management. But Maggie wasn't done yet. Her final move was the cruelest of all. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, claiming I had made suicide threats and needed to be forcibly committed. A VA social worker pulled into my driveway at 5:30 a.m. just as I was preparing for the spillway operation. So there I was, explaining my mental stability while getting ready to flood a subdivision. Not exactly a normal Tuesday morning chat. Then my phone rang. Sarah, my sister, calling from California. Her voice cracked through the line. "I can't lose you too, Jake. Please, this isn't what Pops would want."
For one brief moment, I almost broke. Then I found Pop's final journal entry, where he wrote about standing tall against bullies, no matter how big or powerful they seemed. My heart steadied, my resolve hardened, solid as concrete, and I knew exactly what had to be done. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., With federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the sky a fiery orange, I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was pure poetry. Not a violent crash, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek flowed in its original bed, exactly where nature had intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek, cupping the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Maggie's reaction was instant and predictably over the top. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her perfectly practiced morning show composure cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim stayed calm. "Ma'am," she said, "this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was already live streaming on Facebook, voice rising toward hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when unstable veterans have weapons." Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged. In the original creek bed, her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter interviewed downstream farmers about their restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the story. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter, carefully confused, asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How exactly is this an attack?"
You could almost hear Maggie's narrative collapsing in real time. Rick was frantic, calling Judge Walsh, screaming into his phone about property values and campaign contributions. "That psycho is destroying millions in property value," he yelled, forgetting that Amanda was recording the conversation from the courthouse steps. Here's a legal nugget. Texas is a one-party consent state, meaning you only need one person's permission to record a phone call, and that person can be yourself. The engineering validation was beautiful. EPA agent Kim measured the water flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns perfectly. Tony Riggs documented every step. This was exactly how Willow Creek flowed naturally before the 2022 diversion. Federal agencies prioritized natural water flow over development convenience, and we were proving it in real time. Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system filled for the first time in 18 months. 3 downstream farms reported restored water access for their stock ponds. Even the local diner owner brought coffee and homemade kolaches, saying, "My daddy farmed here, this is how it should be." Some of Maggie's supporters began quietly leaving as they realized no homes were actually flooded. Turns out it's hard to stay outraged when the disaster you're protesting is just water flowing where it always belonged. Meanwhile, the financial house of cards began to collapse. The HOA construction company received a cease and desist order from state investigators. All work on the development stopped, pending a fraud investigation. Maggie discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided due to fraudulent water access claims. But she wasn't finished. Panicked, she called Rick. "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Rick, apparently having learned nothing from the arrest of his previous security team, sent 3 concrete trucks. They accidentally dumped their loads across the creek bed. Immediately, federal agents arrested the drivers. Interfering with a federal environmental investigation isn't a civil matter, it's a felony.
The technical success was everything I'd planned. Water flow stabilized perfectly for both agricultural and environmental needs. No residential areas were flooded. The creek stayed within its natural banks, exactly as 45 years of seasonal patterns had proven it would. My Army Corps engineering had been flawless. The political fallout was immediate. City Councilman Martinez arrived, publicly demanding Rick's resignation. "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock," he declared to the gathered media. "You're done." Federal investigators expanded their probe to include RICO charges for systematic land fraud. Tony told me later, "This is the smoking gun we needed for criminal prosecution." But the sweetest moment came when Maggie realized her $2.3 million investment was now worthless without the fraudulent water access. She screamed at me across the creek, "You've destroyed everything! 35 families!" I responded calmly, loud enough for every camera to catch. "No, ma'am. I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally, just like everyone else." Maggie stormed off, threats of federal lawsuits trailing behind her like smoke that would never ignite. Miguel's extended family arrived with homemade tamales and cold beer, and Mrs. Chen performed a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the restored creek. In that moment, I realized something crucial. This was never about revenge. It was about community, the kind Pops had built, one neighbor at a time, one drought at a time, one act of generosity at a time. The media narrative shifted completely. Environmental groups hailed the spillway operation as a model for ecosystem restoration. The Veteran Floods neighborhood story became Community Reclaims Stolen Water. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home.
Judge Walsh's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, HOA residents, and federal agents filled every seat, with overflow crowds pressed against the windows. The electricity in the air was palpable. This wasn't just a legal hearing, it was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived with a 3-piece army, high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses, and enough legal firepower to take down a small government. She traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of the concerned community leader defending innocent families. I showed up with Amanda, wearing a simple button-down shirt and Pop's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. The gallery was split like a wedding gone wrong. HOA supporters on the left, clutching "Protect Our Kids" signs. The community on the right, weathered hands and determined faces. Maggie's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $2.7 million in flood damage from my spillway operation. They wheeled in a psychiatrist who had never met me, happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based on newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, until Amanda stood. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant, the ironclad legal document that required seasonal flooding. EPA agent Kim took the stand and testified that my spillway operation had restored natural water flow patterns without causing any property damage. Historical photos showed that current water levels perfectly matched 60 years of natural seasonal patterns.
Here's your final knowledge nugget. Legal water rights documentation always trumps recent development claims, especially when federal environmental agencies back you up. Next, Tony Riggs testified as an EPA enforcement officer. His words were devastating. The HOA development had violated 3 separate federal environmental laws, committed systematic insurance fraud, and destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Walsh visibly squirmed as the federal crimes were detailed in his courtroom. You could see him calculating whether his loyalty to Rick was worth risking obstruction of justice charges. The breaking point came when Amanda called Rick to the stand. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed overseas and revealed his financial stake in the construction company.
When Amanda played the recorded phone call in which he plotted to destroy property values, Rick exploded. "This is a federal setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. His own words, captured on audio, were a perfect record of the conspiracy. But the real power came from the community. Miguel Santos described 3 generations of farming destroyed by the creek diversion, tears streaming as he recounted his grandfather's dreams dying with the stolen water. Mrs. Chen showed photos of her family garden, once lush and green, now brown and withered. Her quiet dignity spoke louder than any legal argument. Fire Chief Martinez confirmed that the spillway operation was professionally executed with 0 safety violations, and downstream property owners verified that their agricultural water access had been fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for what would be her final performance. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she trembled, pointing at me. "He's taking revenge on innocent families, using psychological warfare against children." She claimed I'd threatened her safety and labeled the spillway operation environmental terrorism designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents.
When Amanda called me to testify, the courtroom fell silent. I spoke directly to Judge Walsh. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek stolen from my family and this community for 45 years. I presented Pob's journals documenting decades of shared water and explained my Army Corps engineering calculations." The mic drop moment came when Amanda presented the final evidence, documentation showing Maggie's previous Houston HOA paid $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion scheme. The federal prosecutor stood, announcing a criminal investigation into an interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as the scope of the corruption became clear. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied all restraining order requests, ruled my spillway operation legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to cease any interference with federal environmental investigations. His warning to Rick was sharp. This court will not obstruct lawful federal enforcement. Federal agents escorted Rick from the courthouse while banking investigators served additional warrants. Maggie, surrounded by reporters with nowhere to hide, refused comment and sped away in her BMW, likely already calling moving companies. I emerged to cheering crowds of farmers, environmentalists, and townspeople who had witnessed justice flowing as naturally as water finding its way home. Amanda announced the federal RICO investigation at an impromptu press conference, and Miguel thanked me on behalf of every affected family. My statement was simple. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by the land and the people who depend on it. 6 months later, justice had flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Rick Thornwell pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and received 3 years in federal prison. Maggie faced $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway.
The construction company was hit hard. They paid $12 million in EPA fines and were banned from all federal contract work. The HOA completely collapsed, and the residents formed a new community group, one that cared about protecting the land instead of controlling people. My property value bounced back to $1.2 million, thanks to the federal environmental designation that made it more valuable than any slick suburban project ever could. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud case went to something that truly mattered. I bought Miguel's family farm at a tax auction and gave it back to him, debt-free. Here's the truth. Restoring nature often raises property value more than development ever will. But the real victory wasn't money. It was the transformation of the entire community. The revived creek became a center for ecotourism. People came to kayak, fish, watch birds, and enjoy the water where rows of McMansions were once planned. Mrs. Chin's garden turned into a showcase for sustainable farming, and 3 downstream farms reported their best harvests in over a decade. The local diner became the unofficial headquarters of the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and environmentalists gathered to plan the next stand against corporate water theft. The environmental results went beyond anything we imagined. Protected Guadalupe fish populations returned to pre-diversion levels in just 4 months. The Audubon Society confirmed 12 bird species had returned to the wetlands. Texas Parks and Wildlife officially named the creek a critical wildlife corridor, giving it permanent protection. My spillway project even became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Turns out, sometimes the best revenge is simply doing your job the right way.
On a personal level, I found a quiet peace I didn't even realize was missing. I restored Pop's farmhouse using sustainable materials, and Sarah moved back from California to help run our growing agritourism business. As for Amanda and me, let's just say fighting environmental crime side by side builds a bond that's hard to break. The impact spread across Texas like water finding new paths. Environmental groups now use the Willow Creek model to challenge illegal diversions statewide. Federal agencies reference our case in new water rights enforcement guidelines. I became an unofficial consultant for communities battling HOA abuse, and my phone hasn't stopped ringing since. We also created the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Miguel's daughter, Maria, was the first recipient, and she's now studying environmental engineering at UT Austin, determined to protect Texas waters from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival now celebrates restoration, resilience, and unity, with local food, environmental education, and veteran support programs. We also raised funds for a water rights legal defense initiative that has already helped 6 other communities fight back. My favorite sight of all, kids splashing in the creek where houses were supposed to stand, laughing in water that flows free because a whole town chose to stand together. Every Sunday, I visit Pop's grave and bring creek water and a mason jar, just like he used to after heavy rains. "Thanks, Pops," I tell him. "The creek's singing again, just like you said it would." The Legacy Project made sure this victory would last. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now owns the development rights to the entire watershed, creating a permanent buffer zone against future construction. No one will ever steal this water again.
And here's the beautiful twist. Maggie's Houston HOA now faces federal RICO prosecution because of our case. 147 families across 3 states filed similar water rights lawsuits. What started as one veteran's fight became a nationwide movement for environmental justice. Each evening, I sit on my porch and watch the creek flow exactly where it belongs. And I'm reminded that some battles are worth every ounce of strength you have. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek, but you never do it alone. You do it with your neighbors, your community, and everyone who believes clean water belongs to all of us, not just the people with the deepest pockets or the most corrupt connections. If you're facing HOA abuse, environmental damage, or bureaucratic harassment, don't give up. Keep records, find allies, and remember, the law is on your side when you're defending the land for future generations. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments. I read every one and reply when I can, because standing together makes these fights easier. Subscribe if you want more stories about communities taking back control and winning against corruption. Your voice matters, your vote matters, and your creek matters. Next week, I'll share the story of a city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm. So she cut the power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. That's a different kind of power, and how one engineer turned the lights out on municipal corruption. Water finds a way.
justice finds a way. Communities that fight together win together. Willow Creek flows free, and it always will.